MAGA is a 24 hours, never sleep, Red Bull, Coke, and, ketamine fueled writer's room of hate. And that when they use a phrase, you can be damn well sure that there's a reason for that phrase, that they cooked up the phrase alligator Alcatraz for a purpose. And that purpose is that Alcatraz is a notorious prison. And so in using that phrase, you imply that the people who have been forced into there are criminals. And alligator, just as a delicious added alliteration, makes it seem like we're not talking about people at all. We're doing some sort of cute, sexy thing for which we will sell merchandise. Again, a red meat to their base that feels aggrieved and put upon and maintains their overarching narrative. I promise I will come back to my point that America is under siege. And here is the thing about MAGA. The narrative that they put out into the world, their actions match their narrative.
Hi, and welcome back to the Campaign Strategist, where we dig into the art and science of advocacy and campaigns. If you value what we're doing, please like and subscribe and share with others so we can keep doing more of it. Today, we're talking with Anat Shenker-Osorio, a messaging and communications maven who examines why certain messages falter where others deliver. She has led research for new messaging on issues such as clean energy, immigrant rights, reforming criminal justice, and more. Her work has led to progressive electoral and policy victories around the globe. Her writing and research has been profiled in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Grist, and lots more. She's the author of Don't Buy It, The Trouble with Talking Nonsense About the Economy. She hosts Words to Win By, a podcast, and she's also a frequent or weekly guest. I'm not sure which it is. Is it weekly on Michael Podhorser's podcast?
It's weekly, but sometimes
weekly
stuff
and
happens.
Then some. As principal of ASO Communications, Anat is asked to educate and challenge attendees at all kinds of auspicious events around the world. So I'm super excited to have conned her into joining me here today. Anat, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on the Campaign Strategist.
Thank you for having me.
I have followed your work and joined your briefing for years now, and I love how you balance clarity and conviction with humor, especially in dark times, and present such great on-target advice on how should we be talking about the issues of the day. But I did want to start with, how did you get into this work?
Always been a person who wanted to try to make the world better, for lack of a less cheesy thing to say, and was interested from a very young age in language, come from a multilingual household, grew up speaking multiple languages. My mom's an interpreter. When I was in undergrad, studied languages, studied linguistics, and became familiar with the work of folks like George Lakoff, Zoltán Kovács, who was a Hungarian, Eve Sweetser, and specifically a sort of subgenre of linguistics called cognitive linguistics, which holds that language is actually instantiated in the brain and that things like metaphors, when we say to each other, for example, things are looking up, or I was down in the dumps, or we call a prolonged period of sadness a depression. It's because we have, in multiple language families, including in ours, the notion that good is up and bad is down. And so what that means in political terms is that when we call the wealthiest 1% the top, and when we call people without money the bottom, what we find is that that actually conveys more than sort of size of pocketbook. It actually transmits to a sense of moral worth. And so that expression in our language, well, what is he worth? How much money does he got? It bleeds into this idea that rich people are actually better. And while, of course, we are in a particular pitchforks moment, at least among the majority of Americans, there is a kind of very strong ethos in our culture and society of reverence for the rich. Why am I going into this cul-de-sac? I'm going into this cul-de-sac to tell you that interested for a long time in language, and then went and did political communications in lots of different facets. And what I found in those contexts is not a shock for anyone who's done political comms. It was a lot of people putting a finger into the wind and being like, well, we'll call our campaign that because that sounds good. When I would ask people, oh, why did you call it that? Or why did you name it that? Or why is that how you framed it? They would say something like, well, it sounded good to me, or, that's what I think resonates. Or my favorite answer, the URL was available, to which I generally respond, well, then it must be very popular and catchy if literally no one on the internet had thought of it. Then fast forward, went to graduate school in public policy, but also did work in cognitive linguistics at Berkeley, where Lakoff is emeritus. And sure enough, started to see that instead of just guessing at how we say things and how they would land with people, there are systematic ways to actually make choices about our metaphors, about our wording, about the frames we call upon, the stories we tell, what we choose not to say, and then went to work on that. And basically have been doing it ever since.
And I'm glad for it. I want to start with Trump because there's something about him that I find puzzling. And that is, he's got a weird communications style, but he also he is an incredibly potent communicator. How do you reconcile that or think about that?
He does a few things that are sort of hallmark textbook. And, I say this hopefully with like utter and complete loathing and disgust and, attempting not to vomit. Far be it from me to credit him with anything. I hope all of the listeners understand. I'm merely speaking about within his own context and what he's trying to quote unquote accomplish. When I say that he is good at it, that's truly what I mean. So one of the things that he does is he follows the rule I try to get candidates and leaders to very little avail on the left, which is say fewer things and say them more often. He is remarkably good at repeating himself, and that's incredibly important. Because in order for a signal to break through the noise, it takes people hearing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And one of the tricks of our brain, which is unfortunate but is real, is something that's known as the illusory truth effect. What this means is that messages that feel more familiar to people are rated to be more true and more desirable. Because what they do is they create what's called cognitive ease. It's basically when I go da 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 and your brain goes da da, now we've co-created a message in essence. This is the same reason why the setup punchline is so common in humor. It's not in all of humor, but it's a very, very common thing. It's because the cognitive payoff of getting a joke, just like the cognitive payoff of knowing that when I said da 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 da, the next thing was da da, it feels good. It releases a tiny little dopamine hit. Because now you and I have co-created an idea. We've co-created a concept. You knew what was coming. And our brains like that because they do less work for it. We don't have to get into complex processing. So that is one thing that he does. Another thing that he does is that he is very, very clear that the archetype of an authoritarian is that of a strongman. What that means is that the rules do not apply to him. Adhering to the rules in any dimension, the rhetorical rules, the literal rules, the legal rules, the conversational rules, the fact that he is able to be in violation and continuously do things that, people don't do, from everything from kind of being train of thought over here, train of thought over there, talking about this, then talking about that, then making no sense, then saying covfefe, which I'm not arguing is always intentional. I do think there is some sort of pretty significant stuff happening. So I don't mean to say he's the architect of all of this deliberately. And I think people who are attributing some sort of continuous evil genius to his every utterance are absurd also. I think that there is a core of things that he does that are kind of just the basis of sales. Yeah. And part of that, and this is where the left just has been flummoxed since this man, rode down the golden escalator and arguably before, because we have an expectation that people are going to follow the rules at every level. The conversational rules, don't use words that are not words rules, the law is the law rules. We just constantly are can you believe he just did this? Can you believe he just said that? Can you believe, no one is above the law. No one is above the law. No one is above the law, which I could talk about for the entirety of this, but I will leave it there and see if you want to pick it back up. A strong man makes his own rules. He doesn't follow the rules. The non-adherence to rules is what proves that he can do whatever he wants. And that is extraordinarily attractive to his base because his base has been conditioned and primed through a grievance narrative, which again is not just Trump. I mean, Machiavelli literally wrote about this. The siren song of the authoritarian is to foment a counter-revolution against a revolution that never occurred. It is to say to people, you know why your life sucks. You know why you don't have a job. You know why you have more month than check. You know why you feel out of place. You know why your son can't get into the university that he very much deserves to be in, because of course he deserves it, is because of those people. And those people can take many forms. It can take the form, as Bolsonaro insisted in Brazil, of quote unquote gender ideology and uppity women and queer people who kind of don't know their place. Or it can take the form, as Orban insists, of Syrian refugees and Roma people. Or it can take the form that, of course, it does with Trump here in the States, which I'm sure everybody is very familiar with. Going back to your original question, which I promise I didn't forget, I'm just trying to model Trump by having no conversational through line. I wanted to go meta in my answer. I wanted to both answer and do the thing to you. He demonstrates that he commands all things by not being in adherence to norms. What he has promised his base is, I alone can fix it. And so part of his kind of unwillingness to speak in a presidential style, whatever that means, is proof to his base that he can do whatever he wants. And that is extraordinarily appealing to people who have been sold a story that they're not allowed to do anything. They're not even allowed.
They're victims of the rules. They're victims of the structure that these lib people have created that's holding them back. So they love the fact that he comes in and blows them up. The rules thing is really interesting. It comes up in several places. This fundamental disadvantage of following the rules, at least right now, in the way that it manifests on the internet, but also in terms of even political strategy and structure, where right now Trump is getting Texas Republicans to redraw maps midstream, basically, in order to get a few more congressional districts, and they're working on other states to do it. And you look at Democratic-dominated states, and Democrats have tied themselves up from being able to do that by creating independent commissions and making it part of the Constitution. Has following the rules always been a disadvantage in politics? I'm wondering how you think about it, particularly in the communications context.
I believe that we should tell the truth. And every bit of messaging advice that I have ever given to anyone ever has involved saying things that are true and never saying things that are not true. To me, that's because that's just the correct thing to do. The end, not negotiable. But I think that...
I wasn't trying to get you to say, oh, yeah, we should probably lie more.
I'm happy to say completely and totally inadvisable things, and just give me a moment. I will. I don't need to be goaded into saying things I have no business saying. I mean, I haven't started talking about Democrats. As soon as we do, I will say things I shouldn't be saying. So I don't need help getting myself into that position. Yeah, I'm just telling you the truth about how I feel about truth. I wish that our only problem on the left was just obsessive adherence to the rules. And what I mean by that is so many things. First, we are playing the world's stupidest game of taboo. I don't know if you know that game. That's a game where you have to make people guess a word and there's a list of words you're not allowed to say. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was 501c3 permissible to say, for example, I'm making up this number, 125 Republicans running for Congress deny the results of the election, because that was a factual statement. And lawyers were like, yes, you can make factual statements. That is not electioneering. Then that became impermissible because somehow that is no longer 501c3 to make factual statements. 2 years ago, I had a lawyer flag that a document that was entitled Our Vision for Democracy was not 501c3 because of the word our.
Holy smokes.
I have been told that making reference to, and I quote, the Democratic Party in a factual statement is not 501c3. We can talk about democratic policymaking, but not the party. Every single day, and I wish that I were exaggerating, I'm giving you specific concrete for instances, things that are just absolutely clearly not violations of 501c3, do not count as electioneering, do not count as anything wrong. People are so afraid of their own shadow that they are unwilling to just tell the truth. They are unwilling to tell the truth. I will give you a concrete for instance. I have been asking folks to stop repeating the odious, horrific, terrible phrase, alligator Alcatraz, for weeks. And I have explained that MAGA is a 24 hours, never sleep, Red Bull, Coke, and, ketamine fueled writer's room of hate. And that when they use a phrase, you can be damn well sure that there is a reason for that phrase, that they cooked up the phrase alligator Alcatraz for a purpose. And that purpose is that Alcatraz is a notorious prison. And so in using that phrase, you imply that the people who have been forced into there are criminals. And alligator, just as a delicious added alliteration, makes it seem like we're not talking about people at all. We're doing some sort of cute, sexy thing for which we will sell merchandise. Again, a red meat to their base that feels aggrieved and put upon and maintains their overarching narrative. I promise I will come back to my point that America is under siege. And here is the thing about MAGA. The narrative that they put out into the world, their actions match their narrative. They tell people the lie that Los Angeles is a hellscape overrun by evildoers who are, part bionic man, Latino immigrant who apparently can smash buildings and eats cars for, I don't even know, right? So ultra powerful that they've kind of taken over in some sort of opening credit scene, superhero movie hellscape. And then they send the Marines and the National Guard there with weapons of war. Because if you believed, if you actually to your core believed, or more importantly, we're trying to get other people to believe, because I don't even think that the MAGA leaders think it. You needed people to think it. Then you have to have your actions match the story. Otherwise, the story that you're telling is a lie, or you're not actually taking care of the evil that you have said that is evil. Democrats, in one breath, not often, not as often as I want, will say we are facing fundamental existential danger, and then the next day will vote for bipartisan legislation. So either you are telling me that what is coming is a tidal wave of authoritarianism that threatens to end American democracy as we have known it for 249 years, or you're telling me that this is a political party with which you have some differences and sometimes you can co-create legislation.
I'm going to steer you back to your label for that place in Florida, because I heard you mention it yesterday and I loved it.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. That place is a concentration camp. It fits Webster's definition of a concentration camp. And the reason why, and for those who are willing, I would actually call it a Florida fascism facility. You want to have alliteration, you want to have something ear-catching, you want to have something that will break a signal through the noise. It's a Florida fascism facility, and that also locates it geographically, which apparently is very important to people. On the concentration camp, or on the using the F word, it's absolutely critical that we locate what is occurring inside of a broader historical and geographic context. Because part of how we got here is people's unwillingness to believe that we are here, right? So this whole, it couldn't happen here, it couldn't happen here, it couldn't happen here. What John Jost, who's a psychologist at NYU, calls system justification theory. Basically, we are subjected to system justification all over the place, which is basically this kind of self-soothing belief that things happen for a reason, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, there's a basic order to the universe, there are things you can count on, and there's evolutionarily beneficial reasons why humans think that and need that and so on. But what it has done in US politics is rendered people incapable of believing that it could ever happen here, so that it's literally happening right in front of them and they're still claiming it isn't. And so when we are not willing to say that this is a concentration camp and that this is a fascist power grab, then people are like, okay, well, then I guess I don't really need to be that concerned or that upset or in the streets doing anything about it.
That's one of the terms that I've seen you promote for that during the whole reconciliation bill fight, which is one of the most destructive pieces of legislation we've ever passed. You pushed for people to call it the MAGA murder bill because it's going to kill a lot of people, whether it's through getting the tax deduction for their silencer or denying hungry kids food or people health care. I think the important thing here is let's not be polite. Let's call this stuff what it actually is and what it actually does. So are there other examples of where there's just much better ways to refer to things that are part of current events that people should be using?
Let's not call things that are not deportations, deportations. The word deportation has a meaning. It implies that there is a legal process. A deportation involves a deportation hearing. It does not involve a masked man who refuses to identify himself, strapped with, every arm in the book, not even demonstrating a badge, no judicial warrant, with some sort of invented paper that he scribbled on, and taking people in the day and the night. I think it was last week, Beaverton, Oregon, preschool, Portland suburbs. They took a dad at preschool drop-off at a Montessori school in front of all the 3-year-olds who were getting dropped off. And the kid is screaming in the car. I happen to know a lot about this case because I'm organizing with the parents. That guy is married to a U.S. citizen and is in the process of adjusting to a green card. Those are not deportations. They're abductions.
The manner in which they're doing this, abducting people and sending them to foreign prison camps and concentration camps, is that also intended to match the level of threat that they have painted that immigrants pose? We have to do it this way because this is really reinforcing the horror stories and the way we've been trying to scare you about this all along.
Yeah, they have put themselves into a very challenging rhetorical position because their rhetorical position all along has been America is overrun by immigrant criminals who are out marauding the streets and belonging to gangs. And it turns out that America is overrun by people who are picking our vegetables. And America is overrun by people who are working in home health care and nail salons and as physicians and game developers. Just everything, every kind of job under the sun, right? This is what is so absolutely infuriating. They sold a story that immigrants are lawless, jobless, and aimless, and they are picking people up at their court hearings, meaning that they are obeying the law, at their jobs, meaning that they are employed, and at schools, meaning that they are in the process of bettering themselves. So, which is it? They are trapped in making their story come to fruition. The only way that works is what you said, is sirens blasting and weapons out and drawn. But in reality, that's not actually what's occurring. That's not actually who's here. That's not actually the situation. What we've seen with authoritarianism the world over is that you have to keep the story that you, the beleaguered majoritarian population, are under threat. In the first round, you take XYZ people, but you still need your threat story. So you need to do two things at once narratively. We told you we would protect you. We told you that we alone would save you. We told you that we alone would make you great and make you safe and make you prosperous. We are showing you how we are getting rid of these people. But then presumably, if you were good at that, you got rid of the people. And then what does the story become? If you effectively got rid of the threat because you are so good at this. So now you need new people to be a threat. Otherwise, you can't sort of keep making good on your story. And that's why the pie of culpability has to keep expanding. And new kinds of people have to be the problem. Isn't this cheery? Aren't people glad they're listening to this?
I watched the pod. Yesterday's Pod with Pod. Yeah. You guys did start off pretty dark. It got more forward-looking and optimistic as it went, but I felt for you because I know you're both, many of us are deeply embedded this day in and day out. And sometimes it just, it feels heavy. And I did want to also recognize and thank you for drawing attention to the fact that the Epstein case is really about hundreds of children who were raped and abused by this man and his network of child rapists. it is frustrating and saddening and all kinds of things that it's just part of like the political tension. And is this a threshold thing that's going to cause this, which people are interested in, but we absolutely forget about the fact what's at the actual center of this. I wanted to just thank you for flagging that.
I appreciate it. I mean, again, this is where oftentimes when I'm advising campaigns, and it's more often that people abroad listen and take my advice than do here for all sorts of reasons, most of which have to do with money and politics. But oftentimes I'm like, you need to sound like a person. You have to talk like a person. And so, let's take, for example, Mamdani. Like, he sounds like a person. Like, he talks like a person. And when people on the left are like, they're not following the rules, and these are the rules, and this is the rule, and the rule is that no one is above the law. And why did nobody listen to the rule that no one is above the law and what the Constitution says, and the checks and the balances and the procedures, and actually due process and habeas corpus indicates, and if you look at the 14th Amendment, I'm like, yeah, dude, like, cool. You went to law school. Right. Like, congratulations. You sound like a hall monitor. And there's a reason that everybody wanted to pants those people in middle school and stick their head in a toilet. Like, you are unappealing. You sound neither strong nor compelling. What happened that we forgot that everything that we do is about people? And so, for example, let me just give you a concrete for instance. With the MAGA murder bill, Democrats are like, the big, ugly bill. I'm like, you literally sound like you're on the schoolyard saying, I know you are, but what am I? Not only is that not clever, it doesn't actually have any stakes. Many things are ugly. Like, that doesn't tell you that it's going to destroy you. It's just always a reference back
Yes,
to
I
the
hated
original.
that. Yes.
And let me take another example. People who want to call alligator Alcatraz, instead of using that, they want to call it alligator Auschwitz because they still need to maintain the AA. The thing that I want to say about that, and I understand people are like, well, Anat, you said call it a concentration camp. That's what Auschwitz was. Thank you. I'm aware. What that suggests is that concentration camps are the sole provenance and domain of Nazi Germany. I think any of us who, have read Isabel Wilkerson or seen Anna DuVernay's movie on the basis of it, Cast, the movie's called Origin, the Nazis got the idea from the Jim Crow South and from enslavement here. Like, we have been concentration camping for a while. It is not a uniquely German phenomenon. And, it was used in the Native genocide. It's been used. I mean, that's what a plantation was. It was a concentration camp. Exactly. You asked earlier about like following the rules. And I told you that my messaging always is an insistence upon truth. I actually don't think we are telling the truth when we say plantation and when we say a detention facility and when we say deportations and when we say a violation of norms and a violation of checks and balances, as if what were at stake was just like somebody, didn't dot an I or cross a T or got a speeding ticket.
Who's doing a good job calling things what they are in ways that are truthful? I know you kind of wanted to talk about what's wrong with Democrats, which would be, we need to hear, but also who's doing it well? Advocacy groups, politicians, like who's good at this that we can look to for more examples of this in action as well?
I think Mamdani does an extraordinary job of all of the things. He is the quintessential example of what I like to call sell the brownie and not the recipe. He is a lot of brownie selling. He is also the quintessential example of engage the base in order to persuade the middle, which has been a fundamental misunderstanding, purposeful misunderstanding. This idea that you could somehow pull your way into figuring out what the median voter, as if they were a fixed person, when in fact every election has a different collection of people voting. So who is the permanent median? Of getting the base to convert the conflicted, because otherwise you simply just don't have enough rhetorical power. And that is what is so infuriating about all this, is that in one breath, the left understands correctly that there's a right-wing echo chamber and that they have their own media and that they repeat each other and they have Truth Social and they have Fox News and they have this and they have that. And, Media Matters does its report with its big bubbles of like this many listeners versus that many listeners. And so on the one hand, there's a recognition that we don't have distribution mechanisms to be heard. And then on the other hand, every time I suggest, why don't you say a thing that someone would actually be like, holy shit.
That they'd want to go tell their neighbor about. Yeah.
That they would want to repeat. They're like, oh, well, but that
Same
sounds
thing.
extremist. Or they literally say to me, but no
Yeah.
one's saying that. The number of conversations that I have had with like, but no one's saying that. I'm like, correct. That's why I need you. So anyway, I'm going to answer your question. I was just venting. J.B. Pritzker does it pretty reliably. Andy Bashir does it in a much sort of sweeter, kinder way. Perhaps not the pitchforks that I would want, but, you know, I understand. Jasmine Crockett does it fairly reliably and with a lot of like incredible panache. James Tallarico does it in a quiet, sort of much more grounded in his Christian faith way. So it's not that it has to come in one version and in one flavor. Greg Kazar does it pretty reliably. It can come in flavors. It can come in your own authentic form. And in fact, it must. Like if it doesn't sound like you, this is what I meant when I said you have to sound like a person. Like use the words that people use, not the words that constitutional scholars use, because most people don't use those words. And then I think that there are advocacy groups that do it. So for example, 5051, which came, you know, self-organized out of Reddit, saw a vacuum of mobilization happening and took up the task. They are organizing a thing called Rage Against the Regime, you know, from Rage Against the Machine. The Immigration Hub, really importantly, has a website and a project that originally was called Disappeared in America and is now called Disappeared by ICE, which you can look up. And it is haunting, beautiful photos of individuals who have been disappeared by ICE and details of, you know, when they were taken, who they are. That, I think, is a very clear and potent message. And then on the flip side, by which I mean the affirmation, which we haven't talked about, is extraordinarily important. We cannot fight fascism only in opposition. We have to be in proposition. And being in proposition would mean, and shout out to my friend Waleed Shahid for the naming suggestion here, it would be introducing a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Yes, I know it will not pass. I'm not an idiot. That is called the Ronald Reagan Act. Put them on record. Ronald Reagan, as I'm sure your listeners know, passed amnesty and even had the audacity, while he was governor of my state, to pass amnesty and name it in Spanish. Braceros was the precursor. It was a California-specific. Bracero means a strong arm. And it was amnesty for people who were working in certain occupational fields here. And the idea was like, you know, they're a bracero, they're a strong arm, they're moving us forward, they're an integral part of our communities and society. And it also would mean, for example, after the horrific murder of Melissa Hortman in Minnesota, devastating, evil, it would mean introducing the assault weapons ban again and calling it the Melissa Hortman Act. It means being in proposition. It means having a campaign that is fabulously fighting fascism. If you want people to come to your party, you have to throw a better party, especially in times of horror. I teach a global messaging program every couple of years. And one of the first things on the syllabus that I make folks watch is the movie No, which is about the end of the Chilean dictatorship in 1990. So Augusto Pinochet was brought into power thanks to a CIA coup that overthrew a democratically elected socialist named Allende. And in 1990, there was a plebiscite to decide whether or not he should be allowed to run again. And there was an opposition campaign, a no campaign, that he should not be allowed to run again, which was granted 1 hour of television at midnight. I don't know if every day of the week or once a week, I don't recall. And initially their plan was, okay, well, we're never going to win this election. The whole thing is rigged. We're living under dictatorship. You know, this was torture, disappearances, the full bit. So we will use our hour to just show the horrors. We will use our hour to be like, these are the people who are disappeared. These are the people who've been taken. This is the torture because, you know, that's all we can do. And a guy who had been working very much Madison Avenue selling, you know, regular products was like, do you want to actually try to win? And they're like, well, yeah, that'd be nice. But like, since we're not going to, we're going to just use our time to show harms and horrors. And he convinced them, this is a true story, to make a campaign, the emblem of which was a rainbow. And the jingle, you can look it up, was Chile, la alegría ya viene, the happiness is coming. And the song in its full late 80s, early 90s glory is like people dancing through the countryside outside, picnicking, riding horses, like painting, laughing, smiling. And it basically says, because I've had enough of misery, because I want joy, because happiness is coming, I'm voting no. It's especially in the darkest moments. And I can count you 10 other campaigns that I have worked on, including recently in Ecuador, a referendum, which is the first plebiscite that it was ever held on climate change, where a tiny little indigenous tribe called the Yasuni won a vote against every big oil corporation you could possibly ever imagine to have a moratorium on drilling and exploration in the region of the Amazon that is in Ecuador, which is called the Yasuni, by doing a campaign that was entirely the future is in your hands. A yes can change everything, and was positive. And that was in the face of, I lost count of how many indigenous leaders had been assassinated by these oil corporations. So when people tell me that it's too horrible and it's too awful and it's too everything and we couldn't possibly have an affirmation, I just don't buy it.
The point of messaging and communication is to move people somewhere, to move them in the direction of the vision that we have and that we want to articulate. I know that you have talked about the challenges of getting politicians to move away from just polling to the middle and instead trying to stretch and figure out. But I think I am trying to figure out, okay, what does that look like? How do you get people to move from where they are to where you want them to be?
I mean, it depends. It depends on the issue. I'm a concrete examples kind of a person, because otherwise all of this is just like nebulous talk, right? I'm horrified to tell you that in 2012, that many years ago, I was part of a really big message testing project on immigration. It was for America's Voice, and it was led up by a strategist named Brian Clayton, and lots of folks involved, like research partners, many, many, many different immigrant rights advocacy organizations involved. One of the early things that we did was I did a big old language analysis. So I looked at what are the metaphors, what are the frames, what is kind of the common discourse, because otherwise, if you don't do that first step, your message testing is basically the world's most expensive form of copy editing. You're testing ecru against off-white against eggshell. You basically really only have one story, and you're kind of playing with permutations of it, and it's very hard to find any differentiation. So I will often tell people, unless in your testing project you find a message that was an utter and abysmal failure, you should be very disappointed in yourself, because that means you didn't really try very many things. So in the language analysis, what I noticed was that there was almost no immigrating in the immigration debate back in the day. Meaning there was stuff about processes and harms and procedures and visas and statuses and, laws and whatever. But there was almost nothing about moving. In the next step, we did these elicitation interviews, and Ryan did hundreds of them. And we asked all of the advocates, how would you describe who an immigrant is to a 4-year-old child? And unsurprisingly, they got on there talking to a child voice, and they said, a person who moves. When we got into the next phase of testing in the focus groups, I wrote a message that said, the same is true today as been throughout history, people move. It's hard to move. To pack up everything and go to a new place takes courage, but you do it to put food on the table, to send your kid to a better school, to create a better life. Immigrant Americans move here for the promise of freedom and opportunity in this country. And we think that moving is one of the best and hardest things a person can do. In America, we're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that's a good thing, so let's make it that way.
Wow.
Top testing message. Very simple. Freedom, moving. And what we found was that, in contrast, the kind of status quo sector message, which was America is a nation of immigrants, other than Native Americans, everyone has da-da-da-da. What we saw both in that testing and in testing that I have done in Australia around people seeking asylum is that nationalism is not our friend. If we are talking about immigration, when you ask people to reason, to think about immigration, but you first tell them, I want you to think of yourself as an American. It turns out that when you ask people the question, as an American, it's important that we do XYZ for immigrants, you will get much lower numbers than if you ask people, as caring people, we should do XYZ for immigrants. What you've done is you've primed them against the proposition. It's just the simplest thing. And so Nation of Immigrants, it's not just that it is insulting to Native Americans and insulting to a lot of Black folks because it implies a volition where there was none. It's also not rooted in the lived experience of the conflicted audience. Most conflicted voters have not actually immigrated. Most voter-eligible U.S. adults were born in the U.S. That's just a fact. And so immigrating is foreign to them. And I say foreign, pun intentional. But moving, way more than the majority of people in the US have moved.
They can relate.
And they know moving to be one of the most stressful, challenging things that a person does. And they know moving not to be a thing that you do from a place of patheticness or weakness or need or whatever. You do it because, to quote a canard, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that's an admirable trait. And so the point of this whole story is that the way that you figure out how to move people is you figure out what is it people are capable of believing and what is it that they need to hear repeated over and over and over again. And, the perfect example of this is marriage equality. It's the example that we all know. When the argument was married filing jointly and hospital visitation rights and taxation, because the polling said, well, where people are is that if you make them think about gay and lesbian relationships, then they get kind of like squeamish and uncomfortable. And so what we are going to do is we are going to have a very processy argument about hospital visitation rights and married filing jointly, because that is not going to sort of like make people picture actual relationships, which makes them uncomfortable back in the day. But it turns out that polling, which is where you could at that time, before 2008, get the majority of people in the sample, including the people who will never agree with you. So why are you considering their scores? The thing that makes people already comfortable is the thing that also doesn't advance your argument and that the base won't repeat. Because there is no normal human being who's ever stood in line at the grocery store and said, thinking the other day about my joint filer and the hospital visit. Like, I've been married to a man for an extraordinary number of years, and I still do not think of him as my joint filer. People don't think about relationships in that way. They would maybe say in line at a grocery store or wear a t-shirt or wear a hat or change their Facebook avatar to a rainbow and say love is love or say love makes a family. Once that pivot happened, which of course did provoke discomfort among the opposition, because they were like, what do you mean love? Like, now I have to think of this as like an actual, and like, oh my, even like think about making love, like actual, the physical. Ooh, now like my brain is,
I have to think of them in relation to an actual human emotion that I experience as well. And that's uncomfortable.
Right. And for the people who are adamantly opposed, that's uncomfortable. Whereas married filing jointly and hospital visitation rights is neither here nor there. But it's also neither here nor there for the base. And so this is what happens over and over and over again, instead of understanding, and this is what is so infuriating, if you would like to score a goal, you have to move the ball into the goal. You have to kick the ball where you need it to go. I don't play sports, and I know that. Instead of being like, oh man, the ball's over there. Well, shit, I guess we'll just get off the field.
This has been so much fun. You're an absolute pleasure to talk to. One last question, and that is, what is a piece of advice or lesson that you learned early on that has really helped you throughout your career or life?
When I was pregnant with my first child, who is now 18 and about to go to university.
Congratulations.
Holy shit. My midwife wanted us to do prenatal, and she wanted that prenatal to include like baby care class. And I was like, baby care. I have a brother who's 11 years younger than I am that I babysat my whole, like, I don't want to take care of a baby. I don't need a baby care. Like, they teach me in a baby care class. Like, what is this bullshit? And she said to me, the most important thing that you could possibly do is start how you want to finish. And what she meant by that was, your husband has not been babysitting his whole life. Your husband has not been caring for infants his whole life. And if you would like to have a child that has two parents, as opposed to a traditional mommy and a daddy who does bullshit, and I'm sorry to the women married to men listening, like say, is the math too hard? Is it okay if I feed him carrots? Is it okay if I do this thing? I don't know. I think he might have a fever.
He's crying. What does it mean?
Right. What does it mean? What do I do? Like, if you would like to co-parent with another adult and have both of you be the two adults responsible for the baby, as opposed to you're the mommy and therefore you somehow magically know all of the answers and he's the daddy, so he like, I don't know, comes in once in a while to like solve crises, or maybe not even, or like go get ice cream, I guess. then you need to take this baby care class so that you can be on the same page about all of the things and sort of have the same vocabulary, have the same whatever. It's not just that has served me. I mean, that applies like if you're a household that wants to co-sleep, like more power to you. I didn't want to. And so it was like, if you are comfortable with having a, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old in your bed, then like, sure. But if you don't want that, then don't start that way. Start how you want to finish. And in politics, what that has always meant to me is that when we do large scale messaging research projects, I tell clients, you can choose pain now or pain later. And what I mean by pain now or pain later is either we can do this research process in a much more efficient, easier way, which is don't have advocates involved. It'll be faster. You won't have 50 people looking at the research instruments. You won't have them opining about what we test and who we test it with and how, and everything getting slowed down and having it be incredibly frustrating. But then when you finish and you're like, we're done, here's the messaging. And they're like, I didn't help. I didn't agree to say that. I didn't test that. You didn't test my message. You didn't try my genius thing. I start how I want to finish, by which I mean when I'm thinking through what is it that we're gonna say, it is always first and foremost, what is it I wish people believed? And more importantly, what is it that I wish people did? And messaging that does not act in service of those two things, making people think a thing, feel a thing, and do a thing, is just simply PR.
That's great. Anat, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, so thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for tuning into The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman, and this is edited by Abby Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again, and see you next time.